So welcome to this webinar. As a reminder, if you have any questions throughout this and you are not on a phone, please go ahead and type them into the chat box. Otherwise, I'll pause for questions during the presentation. So just to give you a little heads up about how this is going to go, I have 5 spaces throughout this presentation for questions. This is really about the writing of a strong artist support grant. If what you have are more questions about the technical aspects of the artist support grant, we actually have an entire tutorial just on how to access the system and how to access the artist support grant on our website on the artist support grant page under how to apply. Also, if any of your friends miss this, we will have this video on the website, but we'll also have one additional workshop that is going to be on Monday, August 19th, and that is going to be at the International Institute. So again, my name is Tunde. I am a program manager in grants with the Regional Arts Commission, and I manage the individual artist grants. Here's a little bit about RAC. So RAC is at the forefront of efforts to transform St. Louis into a more vibrant, creative, and economically thriving community by elevating the vitality, value, and visibility of the arts. There's a few ways that we work to do that. We have some programs like the CAD Institute, like our Canvas project, but we also have some partnerships, and the main way that we do that is through our grants. So these are our 4 grants that you're looking at right here. We have 2 to organizations. They are general operating support, which is for our larger arts-focused organizations. These are 2-year grants. We then have program support. These are for smaller organizations who, and for organizations who are not entirely arts organizations, but are maybe doing some arts programming. So sometimes that'll be like a social service organization, etc. And these are 1-year grants. Then with the individual artists, we have the Artist Fellowship. That is a $20,000 award that is awarded each year to 10 individual artists. And I'll tell you just like a little bit of about that towards the end of this presentation. And then we also have the artist support grants, which is what we're going to spend time on today. So the purpose of the artist support grant. The purpose is to provide direct funds for an individual artist's projects, needs, or creative opportunities in all artistic disciplines. You'll hear me referring to projects, needs, and creative opportunities many times throughout this presentation, but let me know if you have any questions about that. And here is just a little bit about what is new with our granting program if you've applied in the past. So one, we have a new grants application website. It is grants.ricstl.org. If you have applied prior to 2017, then this will be new for you, and you do need to create a new account in order to access the application. We also have some policy clarifications. The first is that artist support grants are intended for an individual artist's projects, needs, or creative opportunities, and therefore projects that are fundraisers, and that means for other people, for organizations, etc., or commissions are ineligible. Artistic collaborations are definitely eligible for funding. However, only one artist can apply for an artist support grant. So if you are collaborating with folks, what we ask is that you communicate with your partners and make sure that one of you is the person that is applying for the artist support grant. If multiple applications are submitted, we don't always know which one to look to, so all of the applications are deemed ineligible. And then finally, previously funded applicants must be in good standing with RAC, with no delinquent reports or required grant documentation outstanding. If you have never received a grant from us, then this does not apply to you. And then finally, just a little bit more info about the Artist Support Grant. So it is a grant between $500 and $3,000 for individual artists in any discipline. We have the disciplines listed below. There are architecture, craft and traditional arts, dance, design, literature, media arts, music, theater arts, and visual arts. We have these disciplines not to box you in. We recognize that many artists consider themselves multidisciplinary. It is so that you're able to select the person who is actually reviewing your grant, or the people, as it were, who are reviewing your grant. So we'll talk a little bit more about what discipline readers are and what that looks like in just a few slides. But again, these disciplines are so that you can tell us, I would like this type of artist or arts experienced person to read and rate my application. So just a couple things about the amount of the grants. The Artist Support Grant is a full grant. So if you apply for $2,000 and you are selected, you will receive $2,000. This range is the range that you're able to apply for. You can apply for anything between $500 and $3,000. But if your grant is selected, you will receive exactly what you applied for. We have $200,000 available for this grant each year, which means we have about $100,000 each round, and that averages to between 32 and 35 applications that we're able to fund. And just for an idea of the numbers, we typically get between 130 and 160 or 70 applications for this grant each round, which is every 6 months or so. And again, we're able to fund from that pool about 32 to 35. So these are the categories that I mentioned earlier: projects, opportunities, and creative needs. For projects, what we mean are, these are some examples: creating sculptural works, book publishing, creating a film or a proof of concept for a film, completing or creating albums, and that does include studio time or hiring bands or instrumentalists that are going to be working with you on that, and murals, etc. So these are typically things that will result in a specific thing, will result in some created object. Then we have opportunities, which are workshops, seminars, residencies, apprenticeships, art fair participation, convention attendance. I will tell you, because we get this question very often, that yes, absolutely, the opportunities that you're pursuing can be out of town. If you're wanting to attend a residency across the country or in another country even, that is a valid application for an artist support grant. And then finally, needs, which are going to be materials, equipment, tools, and space. These are, I am a writer and I need a new laptop, or I need a studio space and I found one. I need assistance with getting the down payment on it, etc. Before we move on, are there any questions? I don't see any in the chat box, but you folks on the phones, I'm going to unmute you for a second. Are there any questions about any of the things we've covered so far?
I'm good so far.
Okay. All right, we're going to move on. So in this next section, we're going to cover eligibility as well as restrictions for this grant. So here's the basic eligibility. There are some other items as well, but they typically just apply to previous grantees. So if you are a previous grantee, you'll want to look at the website or at the guide to see what those others are. But you also probably already know. But for anyone who's applying and will be receiving it for the first time, you must be 19 years or older. You must not be enrolled as a full-time undergraduate student. If you are a graduate student, you're good. You must be a current resident of St. Louis City or County and have been for at least 1 year. And then finally, you must have created and presented your own original works to the public or performed for the public in the past 3 years. That last one is a little bit wordy, and it's basically meant to make space because we recognize that every artist is not necessarily going to be presenting original work. Dancers who are performing other people's choreography, actors, directors, etc. We recognize that your work may not be your own, but it is still delivery of creative work. So we have 2 slides of restrictions. I'll try and keep them fairly concise. So artist support grants can't fund anything twice. If you have previously received an artist support grant, you can certainly apply for one again in the future once your cooling period ends, but you can't apply for the exact same thing or for, say, the continuation of a project. There is some nuance there. So we've had people apply before to make a trailer for a film, or not a trailer, but to make like a proof of concept, the short that will later become a film. And that's something that could be awarded. Later, they could apply for support for the entire feature-length film, and that's considered 2 projects. However, applying to pay for the actors on the film and then later applying to pay for the venues would be considered the same project. So again, it can't fund fundraising or charity, presentation of other artists' works, and this means if that is the only thing that you're doing. We recognize that typically visual artists end up in a space where they're curating group shows or their own shows, that often writers end up in spaces where they are contributing to or even producing pieces that feature the work of other artists as well. Artists love to employ and support each other. That said, if the work that you're doing is only curation or is only showcasing the work of other artists, as in you don't have any of your own included, that we wouldn't consider in the same space as an individual artist who is working to promote their own career. We cannot fund commissions, reimbursements. This one's important. In the application, in the guide, as well as on the website, there is a date listed, and you'll see it on the next slide actually. There's a date listed for when your project opportunity or need can start. And that is because we don't fund things that have already been paid for. And then finally, non-creative project pursuits. So personal vacation, full-time tuition, etc. Those are things that we also cannot fund. Okay. So this is the grant schedule. These are some key dates towards the end of the presentation. I'll include some other dates after we've talked about discipline readers and this process. But we know the application's already open. We know that it is due on Thursday, August 29th. It's due at 11:59 p.m. on Thursday, August 29th. It is not due at midnight. That will be too late and the system will lock you out. So really just don't work yourself to that point. Our applicant notifications are going out on Friday, November 15th, and the project opportunity or need start date needs to happen after Monday, November 25th. The reason for that is once you all have been selected and the checks have been cut, the contracts have been drawn up, that's the earliest date that we're going to be able to meet with you, meaning that's the earliest date that you would be able to receive your check. There will be a public announcement for the selected artists during the month of December, And then just in case we go through this presentation and you feel like I don't have time to do this application right now, I have some things I need to pull together, or if you do apply and you don't get selected this round, then the next application opens on January 27th of this coming year. Now, are there any questions about what we've covered so far? So eligibility, restrictions, or these key dates?
Good.
Okay, we're gonna move on. So now we're gonna talk about the application review process as well as discipline readers, and then we're gonna move into the actual application itself. So when all of the applications come in after the deadline, RAC staff reviews all applications for eligibility. That is base level eligibility. That is us looking to see that the applicant does live in the city or county, that they are not an undergraduate student, etc. Then once that has been completed, all eligible applications are going to be moved on to the discipline readers. The discipline readers and RAC staff are going to read and rate the applications using the 5 review criteria, and we're going to spend quite a bit of time on the review criteria. Then RAC staff is going to make recommendations to the grants committee based on the ratings. I'll talk about that in a second. And then the grants committee is going to review the recommendations, and the full commission will approve the artist support grant recipients. So I'm going to backtrack here just to give you a little bit more information about the Regional Arts Commission. So RAC was founded in 1985 by the City of St. Louis and by St. Louis County. We have a board that oversees all of the work that we do in the organization. And there are 15 people on that board. Half of them are selected by the mayor, and half of them are selected by the county executive. So this grants committee that we're talking about is a smaller number of them. There's about 5 typically, who spend their time focusing on the work that the grants department does. So all of that grant making that I mentioned earlier, they look at that across the board. And also, just so you know, our funding comes from the hotel motel tax. So whenever people stay in hotels, motels, or Airbnbs in the city of St. Louis or in St. Louis County, there's 15% of the tax that they pay that we share with the Visitors Commission. So with Explore St. Louis, they get 11% of that, and we get 4% of that. So I see a question here. Yes, the residency in St. Louis does need to be continuous for the past year, but if what you're saying is that you had a couple months or a few months residency in another state or in another town, or that you're an artist who, like, I don't know, say is in a band or does art fairs and you travel, that you are still eligible. But if you have just moved to St. Louis, or you are a student who has just returned to St. Louis, etc., your actual residence, the place that you resided for the past year, is then not going to be St. Louis. So that would not be eligible. Okay, and so I've talked for quite some time about discipline readers, and I just want to give you a little bit of information about who they are. So with the Artist Support Grant, this is different from the Artist Fellowship, but specifically with the Artist Support Grant, your discipline readers are going to be one of these 3 groups. They will either be RAC staff and commissioners, they will be members of the St. Louis arts community, and then they may be members of the national arts community. Note that center group, I said they will be. Each grant is read by 2 discipline readers, and one of the discipline readers is always going to be a member of the St. Louis arts community. who is not RAC staff or a commissioner. But then that second discipline reader could either be RAC staff, could be a commissioner, or could be a member of the national arts community. We do that because we want to make sure that there's always one discipline reader who is not just tied in and very familiar with your discipline, but who is also tied in and familiar with what is happening in the St. Louis creative community. So once the applications are reviewed by staff, those eligible applications are then read by 2 discipline readers from the discipline that you selected from the following groups. And just so you know, discipline readers, they are people who have experience in the discipline you selected. So if you selected dance, your discipline reader could be a dance instructor, they could be a professional dancer, they could be a choreographer, a filmmaker who focuses on dance. So people who are very experienced and fluent in your discipline. And yes, they could also be peers. And yes, you could also apply to be a citizen review panelist or a discipline reader. We have this page on our website. So if you go to Explore Grants, you will be able to find the 3rd tab is for citizen review panels and discipline readers, and it talks all about how they're selected, the type of work that they're doing. You can nominate yourself. You, of course, cannot nominate yourself for any application that you're applying, but we are always in need of reviewers for across all of our grants. So you would be able to nominate yourself for another area. And then you can also just find out what we're saying to them and how we're training them. Okay, we're going to jump into the application now. Before we do, any questions about discipline readers, about the grant process? I think I touched on your question, Emily. Any others? Okay, not hearing any, we'll move on. So this is the application outline. Everything you see here is a headline of the thing that you're going to see when you log in to complete an application. The artist support narrative, demographic information, your detailed resume or a CV, an artist support budget, documentation of your work, and supporting information. Those 4 things that you see underlined are the required parts of an application, and they are what you will be rated on. So the narrative, which is the only written section, is an opportunity for readers to get to know you. The resume or CV is just a file. I mean, you all, I would think, know what I mean by that. It does not, what we mean by resume, though, is your art resume. We do not mean your administrative resume or your anything else. So while you may do other jobs to supplement your creative income, that does not need to be listed on your creative resume. The budget we're going to spend some time on, and then documentation we're definitely going to spend some time on today. Just 2 notes. So demographic information is required, but it is not a part of your application proper. So your discipline readers and the people who are reviewing your application do not see the demographic information. RAC uses this information to learn more about who we serve, who we're not seeing very much of. We look at this and see if there are areas that we need to take our workshops to. So you probably saw that we had workshops for this current round kind of around St. Louis, and that's based on where we see fewer applicants. So we're getting the word out that way. And then supporting information is an optional section where you can upload things that might seem relevant to your application that are not necessarily your work. So this is if you are an actor or actress, if you are a a playwright, if you're a dancer, etc., any sort of artist that has received critical review, that would be a great place for you to upload that. If you are a community artist who got a letter of endorsement from one of the communities that you're working with, this would be a great place. So it's if you've received an invitation to a prestigious residency or into a program and you've already received your acceptance letter, that would go here. So this is information that is relevant to your application but isn't the rest of your application. And then I'm just going to hold here for 1 second so you can scan this slide, and then we'll move on. So on the very next slide, we're going to spend time with the narrative questions. So I have 2 slides for narrative questions. These first are the space where you're going to tell people what it is you're applying for. You're going to tell them what sort of time frame that you're going to make this thing happen in as well. So first is pretty basic. What are you requesting funds for? Check all that apply. So note, every single one of these is a checkbox. You can say that you're applying for something that is an artistic project, a community project, and an artistic or professional opportunity. Or you're applying for something that is the studio equipment or supply need and other, because the thing that you're doing isn't really reflected here. That said, if you do select community project, there will be a space that gives you the opportunity to tell us a little bit more about your hopes for that. So you'll see the question, please describe the community benefits you envision for this project. The next question is for you to give us more detail about the project opportunity or need for which you're requesting support, and for you to tell us how the grant funds will be spent if awarded. So you have space to write about it, but you also have space for a timeline. You can give us the start date and end date of your project. Reminder that your start date needs to be after November 25th. So the system actually won't let you enter that it's happening prior to November 25th. But your end date is open. Typically when you receive an artist support grant, you're our grantee for a year. That doesn't mean that your project has to take a year, and it also doesn't mean that your project has to be less than a year. If your project is going to be a little bit further than that, just explain in your application about what that time frame looks like. All right, these are the other narrative questions. What important milestones exist within this project? How will this project opportunity or fulfillment of need further your creative career goals? Are there any materials or supplies that you will need to complete this project or opportunity? And if so, there will be another box that says describe the materials. Will you be working with other artists or community partners to complete this project or opportunity? If so, you'll get a drop-down, you'll get an essay space to describe those partnerships. What are the desired outcomes of the project opportunity or fulfillment of need? And finally, do you have additional funds for this project? And if so, there will be a space for you to describe those contributions. A little bit about that last question. You absolutely do not need to have additional funds for the project. This is not the type of grant where matching funds are required. So if your project is going to take, or your opportunity or need is going to cost $2,500, you can ask in your application for the full $2,500. Okay, now these are the review criteria. Before we move on, are there any questions about the application itself? Okay, I don't see any, and I don't think that I'm hearing any, so we'll move on. These are the review criteria. There are 5 of them: artistic accomplishment, clarity on how the grant funds will be used, commitment to deepening and expanding the artist's work, that grant funds will further artistic and career goals, and immediacy of need. Just a note about number 2 and number 3, number 3 and number 4. The commitment to deepening and expanding the artist's work, and that the grant funds will further your artistic career and career goals. That first one, I know that these sound kind of similar, but this first one really is about you. It is about your commitment to growing your career. And that is, I have a whole slide on what that looks like and how you talk about that. Whereas this second thing is, or this number 4, this fourth criteria, is specifically about the thing for which you're applying. So the project, opportunity, or need, and how that ties into the career goals that you mentioned here. So on the next few slides, I'm actually gonna have us go through each review criteria. And what I've done is I've laid out where in the application I think it would be a good place to talk about that. So artistic accomplishment, I don't have a slide for that because that's gonna show up in your documentation. It's gonna show up in your resume, etc. That is gonna be throughout the entire application. However, for the rest of them, clarity on how the grant funds will be used. You're definitely gonna show this in your budget, and by having a clear budget, as well as in your narrative. And here are some questions from the narrative that I think really help to highlight and clarify how the funds will be used. The first one is, of course, how will the grant funds be spent if awarded? And then, are there any materials or supplies? Will you be working with other artists? Why is this question here? Because sometimes artists, when they aren't just collaborating, but they're also paying each other. So mention that. Do you have additional funds? Commitment to deepening and expanding artists' work. So this is going to show up in your resume and your career trajectory that you have in your resume. This may show up in your samples, and by that I mean your documentation of your own work. This will definitely show up in your narrative. And here are a couple of questions. How will this project opportunity or need further your creative career goals? Will you be working with other artists? This is a great question because if you are working with other artists and they are perhaps experts in a field in which you're not that aware and you're looking to learn more, that's a great thing to mention. If they are in your discipline and they are very known in your discipline, and that partnership would help you with your career growth, that's a great thing to mention. And then what are the desired outcomes is another space where you could potentially talk about your own commitment to deepening and expanding your work. Then here's this next one, that grant funds will further your artistic and career goals. And again, this is a build off of the previous criteria, but it's not the same. So with this, it is about how this project opportunity or need is going to contribute to the goals that you listed, addressing the previous criteria. So the narrative questions that I think help are, how will this, again, further your creative career goals? Will you be working with other artists, and what are the desired outcomes? This also is going to show up in your resume and in your budget. And then finally, immediacy of need or time frame. This one's a tricky one. Often people fall into the space of being nervous that this means they are at a disadvantage if they are applying for something far in advance. And that's not the case. Each of these is rated, each of these 5 criteria is rated equally, meaning, or not rated equally, but is weighted equally, meaning that it's the culmination of all of them, or the total from all of them, that makes your rating. So with this, we'll see it in your narrative, in the essay space, as well as in the timeline. We'll see it under the question, what milestones exist, where you're able to list more of a schedule if there is one. We'll see it in the question, will you be working with other artists? And then finally, what are the desired outcomes? We will also see this in your budget. or we could, we may not. So those are the 5 criteria, and now we're going to talk about what a strong proposal looks like. Here is an outline of the 4 things that I think make a strong proposal, and then on the next few slides, we're going to actually break this down and talk about each of them. So that the narrative contains a clear and succinct description of the project opportunity or need, as well as communication of your career goals. That there is a clear and balanced budget, that you have strong, clear, and relevant documentation, and finally, that you don't make assumptions about the reader's knowledge of your specific niche. So explain your artistic practice. Basically, if you look across the whole thing, what I'm saying is that the application needs to be clear. You want to clearly communicate to them who you are, what you're trying to do, and how this is going to help you get there. So first up is your narrative. For this, that first line is exactly what I said when I talked about the narrative. Again, it's going to be communication about your practice and your career goals. And then a clear description of the way in which the project opportunity or need ties into those goals. We have 2 slides for the budget because this is where often people get a little bit tripped up. So what we're looking at is side by side of 1 page. So if you were in the application, if you were in the application, this would be scrolling, 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 and now we're down here. The first thing that you see in the budget is a space for you to list all of your expenses. And we ask that you list them in a way that what's happening is clear. However, it is not necessary to list every single thing individually. So if you see in this sample budget that I created, there's a whole bucket that's called paint supplies. And then in parentheses, I've listed some of the things that are paint supplies, and then the dollar amount. You wouldn't, I would recommend to avoid listing out each thing because you only have 10 spaces to list all of your expenses. So here you can see all of the things that I've listed for this project. The total expenses for the project come to $4,100. And then you're going to want to explain how you're going to pay for it. And it's not how you've confirmed you're going to pay for it, it's how you plan to pay for it. Because this grant that you're applying for is a part of how you're going to pay for it. You may not receive the grant, but it's certainly a part of the plan that you're making. So the very next thing that you'll see is income, and the first line under income is going to be the grant that you're applying for. So here we've just moved down the page. These next 2 slides are the end of this budget section. So here is the grant that you're applying for. But if you remember, the total expenses came to $4,100. So you want to explain how you're going to make up the difference to get this $4,100 that you need to complete this project. These other spaces under other income are where you're going to explain how you're making up the funds for the rest of the project. There are 2 different ways that you could be doing that, either with cash or with in-kind. In-kind is basically a donation of a specific service or time, etc., because that is going to decrease your expense, but it's not actually cash in your hand. So here I've listed 1, that there's $450 that are artist funded. If you are paying for a portion of or even the balance of what it takes to get your work done, that is totally valid. It is not in any way going to negatively impact your application. So there's $450 that is cash and it's from the artists themselves. And then there are 2 in-kind or donated or volunteered goods or services. The first is the ladders for this project, and that's $150 worth. And then the second is an assistant. One of the assistants that we listed here is actually volunteering. So that comes out of your expenses as well. So if you look over here, what you'll see underneath these spaces is the total expense, your RAC grant request, your subtotal, so your total income. These two numbers need to match. As a matter of fact, our system will not let you move forward if these numbers don't match. If you try to mark this task as complete, I think, or even to save it, and these numbers do not match, you'll get an error message that allows you to go back and find the spaces where it's not matching. Okay, and then this is 3 of 4 points in a strong proposal, and that is documentation. So documentation, this section of the application is a space for you to upload or link to various types of image, video, audio files, as well as document files like Words, PDF, etc. There's a full list available in the application tutorial that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. There's also a full list available in the Individual Artist Grants Guide. It's page 14 and 15 of the guide, and it is basically showing you all of the potential file types that you could upload. One note about the information in the guide was built based on the guide that we have for our organizations. So when you're looking at that, under those areas where it shows the type of file that you can include, you may see 10 images, 5-minute videos, etc. Those are recommendations. Our organizations do have some restrictions on their application because it's such a different process. And they have to be a little bit more choosy about their documentation. But for individual artists, the documentation is most of the application. So definitely feel free to disregard those limits that are placed in the guide. So this is going to be strong, clear, strong, clear, and relevant documentation. And that to me means high quality files, so images, video, and sound. Note that this is going to be viewed online, so those high quality images, they don't need to be 300 dpi or anything that intense. Just upload your image. If it looks clean and crisp to you in our system, it will look the same to your reviewers. And then I also say self-edit, so put your best foot forward. These are some questions that I think help applicants do so. Can the readers understand what they're seeing, hearing, watching, reading, etc., without too much explanation? Will they have questions? Because remember, you won't be there to answer their questions. Is each new file revealing information? So those 3 questions, I think, can help with creating a pretty strong showing through your documentation. And then also, PDFs are recommended for groups of images. This is a limitation of our system. It does not have to do with you and the way that you're presenting your work. In our system, every file that is submitted as documentation appears in a drop-down menu, which means that if you submit, more than a dozen files, you're going to have a very long drop-down menu. And I emphasize this because we want to make sure that the readers are actually seeing all of the documentation that you've submitted. But it is possible for someone to get lost with very long drop-down menus. Also, because I got this question in a recent workshop, what we mean by grouping them together in a PDF is not putting all your images on one page. It is creating a PDF that each page is an image. Definitely still give your images space to breathe. And then here's my second slide on documentation. So files that are named with the artwork's title, date, and materials provide a much clearer snapshot of your career and your practice than those without this information. And so you may want to title your files with, again, the title, the date, and the materials. This using the date actually serves two purposes, because one, it is just, appeasing a curiosity about when the work was created, but two, it is speaking to that eligibility, which is that you need to have created or shown work in the past 3 years. This is how you say, this is what I've done. So this piece that we're looking at here is called Cloudgate. It's by artist Anish Kapoor. Many of you may know it as the Chicago Bean. And this first image of it is a beautifully detailed photograph that shows the way that it kind of interrupts the Chicago skyline and reflects it. It's a beautiful image of the work. This piece, however, is a public artwork. So you may want to show both the aesthetics of the work as well as the impact of the work. So here we have another picture, not quite as beautiful. However, it shows how this draws visitors to the space, because it really does. So what I mean by is each file revealing new and relevant information is not that you absolutely can't have multiple images of the same piece, but that you want to be thoughtful about why you might need that. And then finally, another thing that makes a strong proposal is to not make assumptions. So again, don't assume the discipline readers have knowledge of your specific niche. Now, why would that be the case? Because I just explained earlier that your discipline readers are people who have experience in your discipline in some way, and quite a lot of it. Well, yes, and they may not have the same experience as you. So if you're applying in dance, your discipline readers could be a classically trained ballet artist, as well as a break dancer, or a choreographer, as well as a dance studio owner. So these are people who have experience but may not have specific knowledge of the thing that you're doing. If, for example, you're a Dunham trained dancer and you are pursuing a master class to continue this tradition, these other dancers that I've just mentioned, or other dance adjacent people, may not necessarily understand the significance of that. So you want to explain that. So spend time introducing your work to the readers. Utilize as many of these questions as possible, and then you're going to answer them as necessary. Clearly connect the grant to your artistic practice or career. I said that a couple times. Timelines are definitely helpful. And then this one is a big one. If your work addresses a specific St. Louis issue, succinctly explain the issue to the reader. You don't have to spend a ton of time on it, but you do want to mention it, because again, some of you may have discipline readers that are members of the national arts community. And while you think that the thing that you're doing is, or that the issue that you're covering is something that you could walk up to anybody around here and mention it, and they'd know exactly what you're talking about and the need it's addressing in the community, so your reader may not be from the community. So make sure that you do mention that. Okay, this is kind of a major point to take some questions. So are there any questions about either the review criteria or any of these things that make a strong proposal? I'm not seeing any in the chat. Okay. We're going to move on, but if you do have any questions about anything I've mentioned so far, you're not out of time, so continue. You can go ahead and enter them in the chat box, and I'll take a look at them the next time I open for questions. All right, we're in the home stretch, and then I'm going to unmute everyone. So just now that you know a little bit more about the process, I'm going to give you all of the dates for this grant. So again, it's open. We know the deadline's on the 29th. However, we didn't mention earlier that the application reading period is from September through October of 2019. So that is the period during which the discipline readers who will join, sign up, get a little bit of training on what it looks like to read and rate applications, what it looks like to kind of normalize the things that they're seeing across the discipline. We do a little bit of anti-bias training with them, and then they dive right in. They have between 15 and 25 applications. We never give anyone more than 25 if they're a discipline reader. And then we give them about 3 to 4 weeks to read all of those. After that, again, it goes to the grants committee, and then the full commission votes on the awards. That is going to happen on Thursday, November 15th. And then notifications are going out to you the very next day on Friday, November 15th. Reminder that your award meetings can begin on or after Monday, November 25th. And that's why your project opportunity or need start date needs to be post Monday, November 25th. The public announcements happening in December, the reporting deadline. So if you are selected as an artist support grantee, then again, you'll have a grant year. And so the reporting deadline is going to be November of 2020. But if you are one of those people who your project, your opportunity, your need, whatever it is going to take a little bit more than a year, then we can push this back for you. You'll just ask for an extension. And then finally, the next round of application opens on Monday, January 27th. So this is a very quick, just 2-slide application tutorial. Again, we have a full tutorial on the website under how to apply. So once you, if you have never created an account or tried to with this new system, you'll go to the website, which is grants.racstl.org, and then you'll sign up. Once you sign up, you'll receive an email. This is really important. Please don't use your spam emails to create your accounts. We actually send your notifications to those emails. I just recently had an experience with a grantee who didn't know for 2 months that they'd received the grant because that was a spam email, so they weren't receiving any of my emails. Sign up, you'll receive an email. You need to click on the confirmation in that email before it'll let you log into the system. Once you've logged in, the first thing you're gonna do is complete an applicant setup. This is just gonna ask you basic questions like if you're an artist, if you're an organization, etc. Once you do that, you'll scroll down and it'll say your applications, and the system will say no applications found. That just means you haven't created one yet. So if you click on the green view applications button, that's where you'll be able to actually create a new application and start it. From that point forward, whenever you log in, you will see your application right here. If you have applied in the past, then when you log in and scroll down your home page, you'll actually see your previous applications here. And over in this area, it'll say details, and your detail will say previous year's application. While that may look like you can edit it, you absolutely can't. So you'll still want to go here, click on view applications, and create a new application for this year. All right, we have 3 more slides, I believe, and then we will take some questions. I see one in there already. So we've gone through this about the Artist Support Grant. If you are hearing this and you're thinking, this is not exactly what I need right now, we do have the Artist Fellowship open. That one is running right now. It closes on Thursday, September 12th. We have 2 more workshops. One is a webinar just like this one, and that's going to be on Thursday, August 29th. Also lunchtime, so 12:30 to 2. And then we have one on Tuesday, September 3rd, and that is going to be at Intersect Arts. So the purpose of the Artist Fellowship is to foster and invest in the careers of St. Louis artists of all disciplines by providing funds to allow for more time and space to study, reflect, experiment, explore, practice, and create. What this means is they're pretty much open funds for artists to take the next steps that they feel they need to take in their creative career. It's a high-level award. It's an award of $20,000 to 10 individual artists in any discipline. And in case you're wondering, we typically get between 150 and 200 applications for that. And again, we're able to award 10. And this is a resource that I'd like you all to know about. We have right now on our website a space where you can add your events. This is available to anyone. You don't have to be a grantee. So if you are an artist who makes or showcases work here in St. Louis and you have public events that you'd like people to attend, you can add it. It does not have to be a free event. You can definitely add your ticketed events to this. So you'll go to our website, and in the top right-hand corner, you will see Event Contributor Login. If you click on that, it'll take you to a page where you can add an event, register to become an event contributor, and also find our tutorial because it can be a little tricky. Once you've added your event to the website, it'll show up in our calendar, and typically on the day of your event, it will roll onto the homepage of the website. So it's a great promotional opportunity for artists. I recommend it for openings, for performances, for workshops, etc. And then this is another local resource. There's two of them that I'd like you all to know about. The first one is Volunteer Lawyers and Accountants for the Arts, or VLAA. They are just like they sound. They're a group of professionals who are working in the field of accountancy or law, who help artists with taxes, with contracts, with all sorts of things. VLAA often offers workshops on this, but then they also are able to partner artists with individual professionals to give them more personalized support. And then MAPS, or Midwest Artist Project Services, is another one. MAPS does a lot of direct artist support through what's called fiscal sponsorship. So that is if you and a group of your colleagues want to get together and create something, you're a collaborative, but you're not necessarily an organization. So fiscal sponsorship is the thing that assists you in applying for those grants that typically are only available to organizations. They also do grant review. So they will read your application in advance and give you feedback. I'm not sure, I know there's a sliding scale cost for that. It may be $5, but I don't know off the top of my head. But if you go to their website, which is midwestarts.org, you can learn more about that. All right, so at this point, I'm going to unmute everyone and I'm going to take general questions. But first, we're going to start with the one that's here in the type field. So if I have a visual arts conference and related exhibit in March, would it be best to apply in the January cycle, or will this round be appropriate? Oh yeah, in March, you absolutely need to apply in this round. Our application opens in January. It actually closes in March, and it is decided and awarded in late May, early June. So you would actually miss your window if you waited. No problem. Okay. Any more questions?
Yes, I had a question. This is Tiara. Hi, Cindy.
Hello.
I had a question right up above that one. So pretty much, is there like a required number of examples of work that you all would need? Like, for instance, if a painter submitted, would they need multiple art pieces? If so, how many? If a dancer, how many dance videos would be required? Or like a writer, how many, etc.? examples?
That's a great question. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and mute you now.
Okay.
So there is not a recommended amount. We have I'm making air quotes that none of you can see, recommendations that are in the guide, but that doesn't actually, because you're not organizations, because individual artists are so different and your career paths are different, the way that you work is very different, that isn't always going to be the best option for you. So we don't have a required amount or a recommended amount even. I like to say, think of it like an SAT question. So how can you get the most information to your discipline readers while not overwhelming them with information? And that may, for you, be a few videos. That may be a handful of images. If it is a handful of images, though, make sure they're really strong and clear images. Probably you would want a little bit more than that. For writers and filmmakers, though, I do like to stress that you want to self-edit. It is not very likely that a discipline reader is going to have time to read your entire novel or watch your feature-length film. If you're okay with that, and if you feel like wherever they land in the work is cool, then you can submit that. But it would probably be far more helpful to you to include an excerpt. So that way you can really direct where their eyes are going. Okay. Any more questions? If you could type them in the chat.